Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Carl.
And you're listening to Secret Sonics. Honest conversations chock full of tactical advice to help you build your dream career in music and audio.
Whether it's skill development, mixing mindsets, personal branding, or work-life balance, we talk about ways to help set yourself up for success in the ever-changing music industry.
Let's get started.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Carl.
I think that you're perfect.
I'm definitely not perfect. Is anyone perfect?
Are your songs perfect?
No, they're not perfect.
It's like, how can we so aggressively shoehorn an intro into talking about perfectionism today? And I wanted to see, how can I make you feel very uncomfortable?
It's becoming a theme at the beginning of these episodes.
It is. It is a weekly challenge for me.
But how do I make you feel uncomfortable?
By not being here.
Aw. Okay, so we're here, we're all comfortable, and nobody is perfect. Even if you're close, Carl. Even if you're a close second to perfect.
Yeah, which obviously I am.
Listen, you don't want to hire a perfect mixing engineer, but you do want to hire an almost perfect mixing engineer. Is that how it works?
Sure. So on this incredibly stumbly note, we want to talk about perfectionism and how to get over it. That's kind of our topic for today. And this was an idea that Ben originally proposed to me, but obviously this is something that I think most creatives go through, or at least have gone through at some point in their career.
Yes.
So my first question actually, Ben, is why perfectionism? Like, what sparked the idea of having that be a topic for today?
Well, the same way that we did the episode about consistency, because you were asked by Abby from Safari Pedals blog to talk about how you get consistent mixes. I was asked by Abby about overcoming perfectionism. So I was just kind of inspired by that to talk about this conversation, because I think it's important and definitely something that, I mean, I'm sure everyone has dealt with it, but I feel like me in particular has dealt with it as, like, you know, oldest child perfectionist kind of tendencies as a person. And definitely I feel like I've let go a lot from all those things. I'm in a much better place than I used to be. And so maybe we could shed some, wisdom on this and, wax poetic and hopefully inspire people to get over it.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to prod you a little bit. So you were saying that it used to be a lot worse. Like, you used to be much more perfectionist. Two-part question. One.
Two-part.
What did your perfectionism look like? Like, where did it kind of come up in your creative process? And then the part two of the question is, what was the first moment or realization that flipped the switch for you and enabled you to start to overcome the perfectionism?
Okay, the first part is easier to answer. Part one, I think it definitely played out in EQing like sources. Like, I would just EQ things bananas because I would hear all these like little frequency issues and I would just dip them out. And also I was doing a lot of like kind of recordings on the go, mobile recordings and random spaces, which was amazing for learning, but also like posed lots of problems because they weren't perfect spaces or they weren't sound treated well enough. But this kind of like made me get into a thing where I would just, EQ like crazy. And when you process so much, it usually makes things worse. Like, there's like a limit to how far you could push things. I think I saw you talking on Mike and Davina's podcast about like how you don't want to push every plugin to the max. You want to do everything a little bit. And boy, did I learn that, the hard way by just doing it too many times, of just like EQing the crap out of something. And then you bypass it and you realize like it just didn't sound good anymore. Like, you've lost the life because you've just gone too far. So just because you hear a problem doesn't necessarily mean you need to address it. And I think leaving that stuff in, or just being judicious about which frequencies you do kind of like sculpt, is so important. And, as time has gone on and, you make more records and you mix more records, you just kind of figure out what to do because you just have done it so much. And, there are other things that perfectionism played in. Like, I think tuning vocals, like I would over-tune vocals. Not everything needs to be perfectly tuned. I guess it depends on the genre. But like, sometimes you want to let things really be natural. When you're at a certain point in your journey as a producer, you kind of like try to cross all the T's and dot all the I's with all these things. And sometimes you could lose the life. And again, it's it's so genre dependent and so like stylistic. But for me, at least, I do much less of that now, and I'm way happier with the way things sound.
Do you think it was because? So I've been thinking about how it came up for me, like how perfectionism affected my process as well, and what you're saying about how you would be over EQing things and you'd be over tuning things. Do you think that there's an element of when we're still learning and we're still developing these skills, we almost feel like we have to prove to ourselves that we can do it?
Mm,
Like that's why
yeah.
we're trying to, we're trying to get all of the vocals to be really in tune because we see it as maybe a subconscious challenge, but we're trying to say, okay, no, I'm not going to be beaten by this vocal. And for some reason, the goal of having it be, air quotes, mathematically in tune is something that is quantifiable and something that we can aim for, even though we're missing the mark from an artistic and creative standpoint.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to prove to ourselves. It's like an ego thing, and also to the client that we're working with of like, hey, like I can do these things. I definitely resonate with that. Yeah, I think there was definitely a time where I was just trying to prove to everyone that I could do this.
Yeah.
And also prove to myself like, oh, I do hear all these things. I can make these improvements, even if they weren't always helping.
Yeah. So then back to my, part two question, was there a moment, or maybe a better way to ask it, was there a song that you were working on that you had that aha moment of, holy crap, I need to stop EQing this stuff so much? And I'm sure you probably had that realization a couple times before that, but there's probably a song or a moment that made you not just realize you're doing too much, but gave you the motivation to make that change and to actively reel yourself in and stop yourself from overdoing it.
Mm. I'm thinking of one song from like maybe 6 years ago or 7 years ago where I just couldn't get the guitar to sound 100% how I wanted it to. There was like one frequency that was a little bit resonant. I don't remember exactly what I did, but I was also using like stock EQ and Logic back then, which has more artifacts than the Pro Q. Like I get away with a lot more with like a Pro Q3 than I can with the Logic EQ. If you're going crazy with EQ, which you shouldn't probably do, but if you were doing it, and there was like one area that I just couldn't fix, and every time I fixed it, it just made the guitar sound really bad and lame. And then I would let it back in, and it would be like a little bit annoying, but the guitar still had life to it. And I think that was like a moment of realization of like you don't have to fix everything. That's like one moment. And more recently, I think it was like this is maybe 4 or 5 years ago where I was using Soothe on my friend's vocal, and it just took out too much of the life from his vocal because we were just trying to fix a resonant frequency that he naturally has in his voice. And like it just would have sounded cooler if we had kind of let it be and like just like let his voice like really ring out the way it was supposed to, instead of like trying to fix it with like technology that made it actually sound more lifeless. So those are kind of like two examples that I'm thinking about, that like less was more.
Yeah. So what did you do in that moment? What did you think when you had that realization that, oh, I'm using Soothe too aggressively on this vocal and it's taking away the character of his voice?
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm assuming you dialed back Soothe in that moment, but I guess how did that make you look at other songs or other instruments or vocal layers in the next couple songs that you were working on?
Yeah, definitely being more judicious and being like, just because you hear it doesn't mean that it's the problem. I think now it's much more of like a big picture approach, and like bigger EQ things are often just like fitting the puzzle together as opposed to, trying to fix a specific thing. You really need to listen to the gestalt, the full picture of the mix, to like see if something is actually bothering you. Like if something is like really too pokey. And usually there's not going to be more than one or two things like that you're going to want to, at least in a vocal, right? Like there's going to be maybe one area that's annoying you. Like maybe it's 4K, it's too harsh. Like I don't know, but it's not usually all of those things that you're listening to because you can hear them. And so just have to be judicious and look at the big picture. Yeah.
What's something that you still overdo now that you want to make a change for? That's a weird way to ask the question. Let me rephrase that.
Is there something I'm still perfectionistic about?
Yeah.
Now?
Is there something in your process now that you're still a perfectionist with that you need to make a change, but you just haven't done that yet?
Wow, that's a really it should be a good question, but it is a good question. I'm
Thanks.
sure there is, but I don't think I'm doing that right now, but I probably am, and I'm not aware of it. So I think I'm very much aware of perfectionistic tendencies, and I try to avoid them. And it might not be something technical at this point. It might be more like maybe it's like in the mastering stage of me being a perfectionist of like not letting go of a master, perhaps, and like making adjustments to a mix to make the master sound better. Maybe that's it. But I think I'm pretty dialed in what I want. So it's interesting. I was talking to Travis, our mutual friend Travis Ferens, because he had this video he just put up about is mastering dead. And I was asking him how often he asks mastering engineers for like revisions. Because I said it's probably like 30 to 50% of the time. And he said, yeah, that sounds about right. So I think we're on the same page maybe about like, we probably know what we want out of a master. So maybe I'm not being a perfectionist, or maybe I am. I don't know. Good questions. But yeah, that's about as good as I can answer that. I'm not sure.
Well, what if we zoomed out a bit and not just with your mixing, but just like with your business? You know, like as a freelance engineer, is there anything that you're perfectionist about, even if it's not with the music itself? Maybe it's with the way that you, I don't know, write emails or make social media content. I'm just curious if there's anything else that's still kind of,
Oh, I'm sure there are.
Getting you up.
I'm sure I'm too perfectionistic to do as many social media posts as you might want me to do, let's say. And I'm sure that I'm probably perfectionistic about WhatsApp messages and just like messages with clients in general to make sure that like I want to always give the clients I'm working with like a positive interaction and make them feel like I'm there for them and care for them. And so maybe I spend too long thinking about how to respond to messages to make sure that they understand at all times that I'm there for them and have their back, because that's kind of my like thing. Yeah, like I always want the artists I'm working with to feel like I'm on their team and I'm there for them. And so I probably spend more time thinking about how I don't know, respond to something in a text than maybe I should. Does that count? Is that too much? Is that
yeah.
like
No,
even
that
a thing?
does. So, and I think in a way that highlights the, I don't want to say blurry line, or maybe the intersection or the overlap between perfectionism and procrastination.
Go on.
I'm thinking too, like when it comes to sending messages, right? Like when it's making sure that we're crafting the WhatsApp messages properly, like you were saying, or how you were saying that you're not making as many social media posts as that I'm going to constantly poke you and harass you to start doing. I think
as long as it's not a Facebook poke, it's okay.
Oh God. That's not still a thing, is it? That can't still be a thing.
Turns out it's still a thing. My wife was telling me that somebody poked her recently. I'm like, who pokes?
That is something.
That's weird and a side tangent.
Yeah, it's very.
Go on.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel right now. Of all
social
the things,
media. You poking me about social media. Go.
Okay, poking you about social media. Well, I know like one of the things that I've always noticed is that there is kind of like a connection between perfectionism and procrastination, and they kind of feed each other, I think, especially for creatives, where we want to start doing more social media content for our business, but we don't because we get in our heads about how great it has to look, or how smart we have to sound, or what the lighting is like, or what the sound is like, or maybe I should, wait till after I clean up the studio, or wait till after this or whatever. And we find reasons to put it off. And I think also the longer that we wait to do something, like the longer that we're working on a song,
the more momentum we lose.
The more momentum we lose.
Yeah.
And the more we're like kind of clinging to this idea of it not being perfect yet. And the longer we wait, the further perfection seems to feel. But yet for some reason we get more and more drawn toward it. Or at least I've seen that happen so often with clients, with artists.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. And also like, I'm just thinking about like videos like I had thought to make for YouTube for like my podcast business, or for this business, for mixing and stuff, that I just didn't do because I'm like waiting to get a better, maybe I should do a bit different camera angle. And you're thinking about the ways you could make it better rather than just doing it, even if it's imperfect. And like, think about how many videos I could have made that I never made because I was just thinking about, well, it could be done better. So I probably should wait till I have that up and running.
Yeah, and that's why I was kind of saying it. They kind of feed each other. Like the perfectionism feeds the procrastination, and the procrastination feeds the
Mm-hmm.
perfectionism, and it's just this ugly cycle.
Vicious
Yeah,
cycle.
yeah.
Hey everyone, friend of the podcast and Grammy-nominated engineer/mixer Travis Ferrance hosts Progressions, Success in the Music Industry.
It's a podcast exploring creativity, productivity, and growth in music. Travis has set out to document his own journey and bring those valuable lessons to you to apply to your own career.
Join in each week for conversations with some of the industry's best and brightest about the mindsets and strategies that they use in their careers every day.
Whether you're feeling stuck, digging for inspiration, or just looking for a mix tip, Progressions is probably for you.
Go check it out wherever you get your podcasts or click the link in the show notes. Wait, so let's talk about how does perfectionism play out in your work these days?
We started with you in the beginning, right? And like what you're a perfectionist about, and then what you started to change, and then what you're a perfectionist about now. So let me do it in reverse. So let me start with now and kind of like work my way back.
Okay.
Rather than like shifting back to like young Carl. But I think much like you, I think the perfectionism in my life and in my creative process has very much seceded back out of the way, and it hasn't really stopped me as much. The procrastination is still definitely there. But one thing that I noticed now that I'm thinking about it, that I still do now that drives me crazy, and I don't know why I obsess over this because literally nobody cares. Whenever I'm making either a cover for a reel or a social media post, or especially for all the classes that I'm teaching, when I'm making any kind of like slides or graphics to go along with what I'm speaking about, the custom font that I use, that like my Carl Bonner font, for some reason in the software that I use in Adobe XD, whenever I use the apostrophe, it just changes to a different font, only the apostrophe, and it goes to like Helvetica or something, and it just looks really out of place. So I have to always go back and like manually change it, and then hit like, I have to like type it, it'll start in my font, it'll like immediately change to Helvetica or whatever, and then I have to hit Control Z and it'll go back to my font. And I don't know why. It drives me crazy, and I spend so much time going back and just like fixing the font of apostrophes because I feel like for some reason it's going to be the end of the world if I don't have the right apostrophe. And like you were talking about the ways that you were kind of getting over the over EQing and the vocal tuning. And as soon as I asked you about what you're doing now, I wasn't thinking about the apostrophes before I asked you, but as soon as I asked you, my brain, like all of a sudden the spotlight went back on myself, and I was like, "Oh shit, why do I do that?"
Wow.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, Carl. I'm gonna say that so that way when I'm listening back to this episode to make sure the edits are all good, Carl. Future Carl.
Yeah.
Hi. Hey. Hi, future Carl. This is past Carl from Wednesday, May 8th. And I'm here to tell you nobody cares about the apostrophe font. So
Nobody cares.
Just stop.
In the words of Frozen, let it go.
I think one of the things that I was really a perfectionist about, I've been a perfectionist about a whole lot of things in my lifetime. I've also been incredibly lazy about a whole bunch of things. And I've never really been able to figure out why I go one way or another, depending on the task. But with the perfectionism, I do know for sure that I spent way too much time mixing when I first started doing production and mixing. I remember when I got my start, like really taking it seriously, and I was doing remixes for friends' bands. There were some songs that, man, I spent easily like 40 plus hours just mixing it. And they sound terrible, right? And I shouldn't be surprised they sound terrible, but I thought that more time equals better result. Letting go and just, I think, honestly, the thing that really forced me to start making that shift away from that particular type of perfectionism of just, mixing until it's dead and useless. It was just honestly time crunches. I think having deadlines forced my hand, and it forced me to let go of the perfectionism and let go of the idea of a perfect mix. The looking back over the past couple years, I guess it's almost like 10 years now, which is crazy. But looking back, the increase in the number of projects that I worked on correlates with my willingness and happiness with accepting the fact that I'm never going to have a perfect song. Because the nature of doing as many songs as I do, like I don't have 40 hours per song to mix, you know? So not only did it force me to just trust my gut, but it really forced me to develop my gut. You know,
Yeah.
I think having two children, that forced me to develop the literal gut, but the figurative gut, like the gut instincts of knowing when it's okay to move on, or at least, you know, as a professional, as a mix engineer working for clients, knowing when it's ready to send to the client to get their feedback. And this goes back to our conversation from a couple weeks ago, talking about how I like to send my mix one when it's at like the 80% mark, because I want to make sure I'm getting a vibe check first. I'm not trying to spend way too much time chasing what I think is perfect if what I think is perfect is not what the artist has in mind.
Yeah.
And that just continues to push me in that direction of getting a mix out the door sooner, because I know that it's going to end up being better. The less time I spend on a mix, the better it ends up being. That's just how it tends to be. And it's hard for a lot of people to hear. And it was definitely hard for me to hear.
Yeah. I'm thinking about, I did an interview for Secret Sonics with John Greenham, who mastered the first Billie Eilish record, the one that everyone loves. And he was just saying, like, when you're a professional mastering engineer, you just like get the song and you basically like spend 15 minutes and it sounds better, and then you move on to the next song because you got a lot of songs on your plate, and that's basically how it works. And so you basically just have to like use your ears and trust your gut and just make decisions and go. And that's pretty much it for like that upper echelon of like mastering engineers, you know? And it's probably for the better, because like you're just kind of, if you're doing something quickly and you're going with your years of experience and your know-how and like the reps that you've put in, there's not too much to think about. You just kind of do as good of a job as you can, and you move on to the next project.
Yeah.
You know?
And you hit revisions when you have them.
Yeah, and totally. Yeah, and then when you have them, when the artist wants something different, then you adjust from there and you remaneuver.
Yeah. I had an example from yesterday where I did a mix for one of my favorite clients that I'm working with. I've been working on a bunch of stuff with him for, I think, probably 3 or 4 years now. And I did mix one in about an hour and 15 minutes. Like, it was super fast. It just kind of really came together. I felt really good about it. Sent it over thinking it was the 80% like vibe check mix. And he came back with just, oh my God, like this is amazing. He had two notes, one of which was just to automate there's like a seashore sound effect going into the bridge, just automate the end of that a little bit sooner. And then the other note was, oh, I sent you the wrong file. Can you just swap this one out? And those were the notes. And it took me, I think, 2.5 minutes to to like make those changes, and then it was done and approved. So I spent a grand total of like less than 80 minutes on the song, and I love it. Like and it's like, and it's I really like how it turned out. Like, I really love this song, and obviously not every song is going to have that kind of experience, but I think what I would have done in the past is, you know, perfectionist Carl would have told me, oh, well, I only spent an hour 15 on this, so therefore it can't be good enough yet.
Right, then you go hunting for problems.
Yes, and I think as mix engineers, when we start looking for problems, I think there ends up being a bit of that patterns in the static sort of issue where we hear things that aren't actually issues.
Yeah, and then you can lose that big picture thing that you probably got right the first time.
Yeah, and that's, I think that comes back to the reason why so many people do the over EQing as an example, because we feel like, oh, well, we have to EQ this. That's what mix engineers
Right.
do, right? And if I'm not doing
I
this,
heard this problem, therefore I must solve it.
yeah. And sometimes it's like, oh, well, guitars are known to be tricky. Vocals are known to be tricky. So I have to go figure out all of the problems that this vocal has, even if the guitar part doesn't have any issues. We're looking for problems to solve. And whether that's because we're just taught directly or indirectly that, you know, piano is going to be boomy, so you have to remove some of the low mids, or vocals, you have to be really careful about the upper mid range. Whether we're taught that, or just the fact that, like we said earlier, we're trying to convince ourselves that we can do it. We're trying to convince ourselves that we're worth the money that we're
Yeah.
charging, when in
Yeah.
reality, we're doing it for, I don't know if it's an ego thing necessarily, or just some sort of getting over like an imposter syndrome issue. I don't know what
Yeah.
it is, but there are all these
Yeah.
kind of reasons in our head that are
Yeah.
making us make these decisions, as opposed to the song making us make those decisions.
Yeah. I'm with you on all those things. Great mastering engineers are paid to be judicious and not necessarily do very much. Like that. And I'm thinking about my interview with Scott Hall, like saying like, I barely touched this EQ more than like, half a dB, like, yeah, I'm specifically thinking about mastering engineers for some reason, but also mixing engineers. Like it's not just about what you do. It's about what you don't do. Because that, being able to actually say, I don't need to do that is what's serving the song sometimes more than I need to do that just to prove that I'm legit and I'm not an imposter. So
Yeah.
like you have to get over yourself and do what's best for the song.
Yeah. And I think what that's making me think of is, just for some context, the really, top tier mastering engineers are usually mastering top tier mixes and top tier productions.
That's also
right?
true. That's also true.
So yeah, no shit, you're not going to be doing too much to it, because it's coming to you and way better than, somebody that's paying, $500 for a master is going to send you probably a song with less issues to fix than somebody that's paying $40 for a master.
Right.
But I think that actually might be one of the reasons why we have a hard time letting go of searching for problems, because when we're starting out, especially when we're starting out getting paid, we're not charging very much money, and the clients that we're working with are probably also not very far along. So naturally,
Yeah.
when we're the least,
That little bit of money is a lot for them at that stage of their career, probably.
So the times that we are the least skilled, the least developed, the least prepared, we are working on the stuff that needs the most help. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like the weird imbalance of being a producer or an engineer, because we're doing the hardest. We have like the most work to do, the most problems to fix, when we are the least prepared to actually fix them. So then as we start getting better at our craft and we start working with better clients who are also giving us better files to work with in the beginning, it does take some self-awareness to be able to say, okay, I'm getting better files. There aren't as many issues here. So I don't have to look for issues that aren't there. Just because I'm used to having to fix a zillion things doesn't mean that there are going to be a zillion things to fix in these songs.
Carl, this is gold. I want everyone to rewind this and listen back to the last 2 minutes. This is totally it. And I think that there's something good about that also, like, because you're going to make those mistakes and you're going to overdo it on these songs at the beginning of your career. And this is going to actually give you skills. And this is something I actually told Abby when she interviewed me about this, or when I sent her my answer to her question, was that like I actually gained a lot of knowledge about EQ when I was over EQing, and I gained a lot of knowledge about what frequencies sound like, like different frequencies sound like and stuff. And so now I have a skill set of EQing that I can put to much better use now with more skills and being more judicious about it.
Yeah.
And so like, thank God you're making those mistakes on like, on mixes or productions that, are not as high stakes.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. That's part of the process.
Absolutely. And I say that's one of the best things that happens to me from like the COVID era, was the fact that I had to mix songs that were all recorded at home by people that probably had never recorded much on their own. Like everybody had to go remote, and there were so many artists and producers that were not used to doing it themselves, or at least not
Should
used
have invested in like Focusrite in 2019. That would have been like the move, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think the best thing that happened to me from COVID, honestly, that whole era was the fact that I was doing hundreds of mixes a year that were all recorded poorly. Like obviously not all of them were recorded poorly, but way more, a much larger percentage of songs and vocals in particular were recorded poorly in 2020 and 2021 than I think any other time in the history of the music industry. And during that time, I did like 600 mixes or something like that. So it forced me to not just make poorly recorded, $100 condenser mics or like USB mic recordings sound great, but it also really forced me to see the whole like smorgasbord of different types of vocal quality that you can receive as a mixing engineer. And it made me much more aware of the differences. So it made me able to hear a vocal part and know, oh no, this is great. I barely have to touch this. Or, oh good Lord, help me please, depending on what it is. And I think that was a really good crash course, not just in mixing poorly recorded vocals, but also being able to tell right away how poorly or how great those recordings are. So I can adjust how heavy-handed I need to be accordingly.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. Perfectionism is part of the process. Embrace it, learn from it, and then as you go on in the career, and the more things you do, the more you'll sort of rid yourself and relieve yourself of the burden that you feel about perfectionism.
I'm going to fight you on one thing. I'm not going to fight you. I'm going to reframe it. Rather than embracing it, acknowledge it. I think that's the step. It's like acknowledging that, yeah, there are going to be things that I'm a perfectionist about. Try to be self-aware about it, because then you can start to decide.
That's way better. I'm sorry. I didn't mean embrace it.
No.
Acknowledge it is way, way better. Yes.
Well, what we can do is, Gavi, keep this part in, please. But
no, I misspoke.
Oh no, I was going to say, Gavi, you could keep this in, but then just take me saying acknowledge and just splice it awkwardly in the middle of Ben's sentence, so it just sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah, there's probably technology to make it sound like you anyway.
No, we're not doing that. Sorry, old school Ben is going to fight AI Carl on this.
Forever.
We're going to leave mistakes in. We like the pimples. This is good. This is what it's about sometimes.
Yeah, it's all about the pimples.
It's all about the pimples. Warts. What do people? Warts and all. That's what people say. That's the terminology. This was fun. Thanks, Carl. Thank you for having this conversation with me. It's good.
Thank you for being perfect, even if you don't think you are.
Aw, I'm not perfect. No one is. Thanks so much.
Bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. If anything here resonated with you, please share this or your favorite episode with a friend.
And as always, we love to hear from our listeners. So find us on social media at Secret Sonics,
at Ben Wallach Music,
and at Carl Bonner. Until next time, bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl. That was good. I think the outro was great.